How's it going, Exile? So the number one question I get asked on stream and in the comments is how do I boost my damage while using Atalui's Bloodletting? So for any kind of life scaling build, it doesn't really matter what spell you use, if you use Spark, Fireball, whatever it may be, I will basically tell you what stats matter for this build and what stats do not matter for this build, and you might be surprised that you might be just wasting a lot of effort and a lot of currency into stats which actually don't do anything for your build at all. So if you want to go from this DPS to this DPS, this is the video for you. In this video, I'm going to start with just briefly explaining how damage calculation works in Path of Exile in general. Then we're going to go over what stats actually boost the damage when using Atalui's Bloodletting. And on the same page, we're also going to go over what stats will do absolutely nothing for your build. And last but not least, I'm going to give you a priority which stats matter the most and which stats matter the least. And if you like the video, I would greatly appreciate liking and subscribing. Also, make sure to leave me a comment in the description down below if you like my content or if you have a question so I can answer it, or show up to the stream so I can answer your question directly. Now with that out of the way and without further ado, let's start with the actual guide and let's go into how the damage calculation in PoE II actually works. Alright, let's just quickly go over how damage calculation works in general. This is a little bit simplified, but for this example, it shall do the job. So basically, I'm gonna put the damage calculation into 6 layers. We have layer 1, skill damage. Layer 2, gain and conversion. Layer 3, increased damage. Layer 4, more damage. Layer 5, critical strike. And layer 6, cast speed. And all of these 6 layers are multiplicative with each other. That means if you have one layer which is really low, your entire damage will suffer. But if you have all layers nice and balanced, you will have the highest DPS possible. So let's start with the first layer. The first layer is going to be skill damage, and since we are using spell damage here, it is very simple. This is really just the base damage your skill does. So the only thing which is going to influence your skill damage is the level of the skill, which can of course be increased with skill levels from items, support gems, corruption, or other modifiers. The next layer is going to be gain on conversion. So this is pretty much, for example, everything on your wand which says gain 25% of damage as extra fire damage, but also conversions where it, for example, says 100% of lightning damage converted to cold damage, even though conversions won't be important for this video. Just a side note here for not causing any confusion, so everything in the gain and conversion layer happens at the same time. So if you, for example, have 25% of damage gained as lightning and then you have 100% of lightning converted to cold, it's still not going to convert those 25% lightning to cold because these all happen at the same time. So in the end, you would end up with 100% of your damage as cold, but you will still have the 25% lightning from the other gain effect here. Understanding this gain and conversion layer is crucial for the performance of our Atalui's Bloodletting build. Because if you read this gem, it basically says supported skills gain 2% of damage as extra physical damage per 10 life cost. Just remember that this spell gem gains physical damage. That will be very important later on in this video to understand fully how this works. Then the next layer is going to be the increased damage. So now it's going to take all of our base damage and all of the damage we gained or the damage from conversion, and then it's going to imply everything which says increased cold damage, increased lightning damage, increased physical damage, increased damage with spells that cost life, increased elemental damage, and so on to it. There's not really much more to this layer, but it's also important for us to understand in this layer that we only do pretty much physical damage in all the builds using Atalui's Bloodletting. So if we have a lot of lightning damage in the increased damage layer, it actually doesn't do a whole lot because the increased damage layer comes after the gain on conversion layer. So we're not actually increasing our lightning damage and then we are gaining more damage from the Atalui's Bloodletting because it's the other way around. So we're going to gain all the damage from the Atalui's Bloodletting first, and after that we're just going to increase our leftover lightning damage, which is basically not going to be a whole lot. So the next 3 layers are relatively simple. The more damage layer simply is everything which does more damage, and it's basically just a multiplier to all our other damage, and there's not really anything interesting going on with this. It's just a straight multiplier, not much more to say about this. Then we have the critical strike layer. Also, this one is pretty simple. We simply have our critical strike chance and our critical strike damage. So whenever you deal a critical strike, it's just going to multiply all of our damage with the critical strike damage percent. So this is basically another more damage multiplier, and also not much more to say about that. And last but not least, the cast speed layer, which we don't really want to look at in this video at all. It's pretty obvious. If you increase your cast speed, you're going to increase your DPS, and this is pretty much going to be linear. So if you do 3 casts per second, basically your hit damage times 3 is going to be your DPS. So quick recap. First we have the base skill damage, which is increased by our skill levels. Then next we have the gain layer, so it's everything says gain damage S. Then we have the increased damage, so we have to increase the damage we gained before and all the base damage. Then we have the more damage, which is a straight multiplier. Then we have crit, and then we have cast speed. So with that out of the way, let's look what stats benefit our Atalui's Bloodletting build the most. So what stats benefit our Atalui's Bloodletting build the most? So I want to start with the biggest elephant in the room, which I get asked all the time. Why no lightning damage? Why no gain 25% damage S? Why these stats do not matter? Because I know a lot of people are overpaying for their wands. They want to do like the perfect wand craft. They have like a video guide on YouTube where guys like, creating a triple gain wand, which is like, 50 divines or whatever. So why is this not good for this build? So let's look at our build, and let's actually look at our damage sheet. So you can see here the total hit damage of our build. For example, in this case here, we have a total hit damage of 247k physical damage, 4,700 fire damage, and 23,000 lightning damage. So the lightning damage our spark actually does is just 10% of the total damage. And the fire damage is actually just, whatever, this is like, 2% of our total damage. So as you can see in our wand, it has a gain damage as fire, and it has a gain damage as lightning. So if we see our fire damage just being 4,000, we can assume, or we can just say, that this gain 25% damage is really just 2% real damage. So it's necessarily worthless. Another example would be if we had lightning damage or elemental damage on this wand, it would only increase the fire damage or the lightning damage. So even if we had 100% lightning damage and another 100% elemental damage, this would really just take our lightning damage here from 23k max to, whatever it's going to be, maybe like 30k. So it's maybe going to add like 2 or 3, maybe 4% more damage to our build. So these stats are really completely irrelevant for our build. So everything which says gain damage as extra fire, cold, lightning damage, elemental damage, these are useless. Do not even look at them. Do not pay money for them. Do not focus on them. Do not pick them on your skill tree. Do not pick them on your rings, on your amulet, or whatever. They are completely worthless. So let's look at a simple example to demonstrate this. So I took one of my support gems out of my spark. So it now sits at like 1.7 million DPS. Now I'm going to add a gem like Elemental Focus. So this says it deals 25% more elemental damage. So I cannot stress this enough. What do you think happens if I put in this gem now into my spark? So let's put this gem in. As you can see, the DPS barely jumped by 50k. So this literally did nothing because it only affects the fire and the lightning damage portion and not the physical damage portion. As you can see, the physical damage stays at 626. And it doesn't change at all if I put this gem in. Only changes a little bit of elemental damage. So that's why elemental damage is completely useless in this build. And I want you to understand this. So if I take out now this elemental focus, which has a 25% damage multiplier. And for example, I just put in this Dibleration here for whatever reason, right? Which just has like a plain 20% more damage. I'm not going to say this is a good support gem. I'm just going to say, if I put this in now, you're immediately going to jump to 2 million. Right? Because this one increases the physical damage and not only the elemental damage. So any kind of elemental damage you have in this build when you use Atalui's Bloodletting is completely useless. Alright, so now let's start with the priorities for stats you want to get to bump up your damage with any Atalui's Bloodletting build. So first of all, for everything which follows now, we gotta assume you have a Rathpit focus And we gotta assume you got a decent life pool of at least 7,000. So you wanna have any Kaom's Heartplate, and you wanna have any Veil of the Night. If you don't have a Veil of the Night, but other good life scaling stats, okay. But, you know, we assume you're gonna have at least 7,000 life, and you're gonna have a Rathpit. If you don't have a Rathpit, if you don't have 7,000 life, it's your first thing to work on. You don't have to get a very good Rathpit, you don't have to get a 2-socket one. All you need is like a 6% cost, 5% crit, 10% damage. If you don't have that, that's your number one priority, period. Alright, if you got your Rathpit and your 7,000 plus life, the first priority here is the level of your spell. Because with Atalui's Bloodletting, basically we have a cost scaler. So all of a sudden, our skill gem levels have a double dipping because they're going to scale the cost and they're going to scale the base damage. So if you look at my 31 level Spark here right now, it costs 157 mana and it deals 726 max lightning damage, right? This 157 mana translates into 5,000 life cost. We're going to talk about that in priority 2, but now still in priority 1, let's talk about the skill levels. So if we add 1 level to this spell now, by, for example, putting in Lightning Mastery, then, you know, as you can see, the DPS jumps by a little bit more than 20%. And as you can see, the mana cost now goes to 171. And the max damage goes to 801. So again, take it out, 726, so it adds 10% damage, and the mana cost was 157, and now it's 171. So it's adding also like 10% mana cost, right? So it's going to add 10% mana cost, 10% max damage. So this is not completely exact, but you can say it's roughly going to be 20% more damage per skill level because it double dips with the cost scaling of Atalui's Bloodletting. So your priority number 1 is get skill levels. If you don't have a +5 wand, get a +5 wand. If you don't have a +3 amulet, get a +3 amulet. The secondary stats are not super important. The primary one you want to get here is level of all spell skills. If you can get a cheap wand, which has completely irrelevant stats, really the stats do not matter at all. As long as it is +5 of all lightning skills, and it has +2 of all spell skills socketed in, you can often buy these for like 15 divines, or sometimes less, sometimes a little more. That is the most important for you. All the other stuff, spell damage, cast speed, crit bonus, gain damage, whatever, it doesn't matter. Most important is going to be the spell skills. So highly recommend working on that. If you're still sitting on a level 19 Spark, buy a level 21. If you can afford a corrupted level 21 Spark, buy a level 21 Spark. These things are relatively cheap, and they're going to boost your damage the most way possible. Alright, we talked about the first highest priority being skill levels. So your second highest priority is cost. So, for example, I have a gem here which is Unleash. So the Unleash gem basically doesn't add any damage to your tooltip. It just gives it 150% more cost. So let's look what happens if I take this out. So I'm at 1.9 million now. If I take out my Unleash gem, I go down to like 1.4 million. So I lost a significant chunk of damage by just losing this cost. So as you can see, my Spark right now costs 3.8k. And if I put in my Unleash, it jumps to 5.8k. So the cost is the primary scaler here for dealing more damage. So however you can add cost to your spell, it's going to be the most efficient. That gives us some very, very good support gems. For example, the Zenith 2 support gem has 120% cost and also a 30% more damage. The Projectile Acceleration 2 gives a decent amount of damage and projectile speed, but it has a 120% cost multiplier. This Lightning Mastery, not a very good gem. Why? Because it doesn't have a cost multiplier. So let's take this one out. So as you can see, we go to 1.7. And let's, for example, put in Considered Casting. So Considered Casting gives us significantly more damage because it has a 115% cost and also a more damage multiplier. So generally speaking, if you want to do the max DPS, add support gems which have, in the perfect case, more damage and a cost multiplier. That's gonna boost your damage significantly. But there's also other stuff which is multiplying your cost. For example, your Rathpit focus is gonna give you an additional cost of 7% or 6% if you have a base one of your maximum life. So if you have, 10k maximum life and this takes 7%, it's like 700 more cost to your it's like 700 life to your cost. So that is actually huge because it later gets scaled. So it gets better, right? So Atalui's Bloodletting has an inbuilt 150% cost. So let's also look at our skill tree, because what I say is the Undying Hate with Tribute to Tech Rod is mandatory. Why is it mandatory? Well, first of all, it gives us our life regeneration, which makes our build function, but it also gives us 50% more life cost of skills. So the more life cost of skills here really gives us 50% more damage. That's really just what it is. Life cost equals damage in this build. Then you have this note here, Sacrificial Blood. Don't skip this, because this gives 15% increased life cost of skills. So this is probably the strongest notable you have in your entire passive tree for this build. So the third priority here is critical strike damage bonus. Because critical hit chance, if you have a good amount of investment in this build, you're pretty much going to be close to 100% or at 100%, because your Rathpit is going to give you 5% increased critical hit chance per 100 maximum life. Then, you can choose if you want to have some from the skill tree, some from your jewels. You can pick up like up to, I think, 80% critical strike chance on your wand as well if you need it. So you should be close to 100% critical strike chance. So basically we crit with every hit. So critical strike damage bonus is its own multiplier. So we have a 520% critical strike bonus. And on top of it, if we look at our passive tree here, we have the Gore Spike here, which gives us 1% increased critical damage bonus per 50 life. This does not get displayed in the tooltip, but it's working. So if you have 10,000 life, this basically gives you a 200% increased critical damage bonus on top of it. So basically, critical damage bonus being the third most important scaler. So try to get critical damage bonus wherever possible. So I have it on all of my jewels, right? So critical damage bonus on your jewels, on everyone, this has 19%, this has just 13%, but try to get critical damage bonus on every jewel you can pick up, and try to get as much as possible in the tree. So get like these notes, like Cooked is a very strong note. Barbaric Strength is a very strong note. Like these nodes leading there give critical damage bonus. These nodes leading there give critical damage bonus. I'm running a Megalomaniac, which gives me Throat Seeker, which is another 60% critical damage bonus. So we try to pick up as much critical damage bonus as possible. Also in our tree, I try to get crit bonus on my wand. I try to get it on the amulet. So basically, everywhere we can get crit bonus, you want to pick up crit bonus here. That is your third most important scaler. It's not as important as the other ones, but it's still very, very important to reach a very, very high damage output. Alright, the next scaler here would be maximum life. So maximum life is an important scaler. If you have your Kaum's Heart, your Veil of the Night, and your Rathpit, you should be at 7,000 plus maximum life. And, your ultimate goal should be to get above 9,000 towards the 10,000 life. So why is it so important? First of all, our Rathpit focus gives us crit chance and damage and additional cost based on our maximum life. So as you can see, we are close to 100% critical hit chance. If we would get a little bit more maximum life, we would jump to 100%. But I just want to show you the effect of maximum life. So right now my DPS is at 2.25 million. So let's just take out, for example, our gloves. So as you can see, my gloves have roughly 150 maximum life and 31 strength. So let's just say these have roughly 200 maximum life. We have like a lot of percentage maximum life scaling, obviously, like close to 100%. So if I take out my 200 maximum life on my gloves now, my maximum life reduces by roughly 600. So my DPS also went down by like 200k, so that's roughly, like 20-25%. So actually, this just like 200 life gave me like 20 to 25% damage. Mainly because I lose critical hit chance, obviously. Because if I had critical hit chance on my wand, it would not be so dramatic. For me, losing maximum life is more dramatic because it's like directly tied to my crit chance. But in the end, it all comes together. So maximum life is really a good scaler. There's a lot of ways to scale maximum life. Most is passive tree optimization and really having all your items optimized. So my boots have maximum life and intelligence. My gloves have maximum life and strength. My ring has maximum life and intelligence. My other ring is mirrored, it's the same. My amulet has % maximum life and flat maximum life, right? So it all comes together to have as much maximum life as possible. And then, you can go crazy if you want to go for like the prism of the grand spectrums, but this is like 100 divines if you have 3 of them, and it's actually not that strong. So if you can see right now, I have like 9.9 K. So if I remove my 3 Grand Spectrums here, where's the third one? So this actually gives me like 800 life. So this is not the priority number 1, right? So now I still have like 2 million DPS. So I lost like, 20-30% DPS maybe. But, that is nowhere worse like 100 divines for these jewels. Yes, this is like very min-maxing, but you don't have to do this. But in general, I would say the fourth priority would be get your maximum life. You want to have your maximum life at a minimum of like 7,000 to 8,000. That is just the default for this build. But everything on top of it, you should work on min-maxing your gloves, your boots, and your rings and your amulet to give you as much maximum life as possible. You cannot do it on the wand or on the focus or anywhere else. The other items are pretty much static. And then, your last scalar would be really Grand Spectrums. And also take into account, if you have intelligence and strengths on all of your items and look at the skill tree, you basically take like all strengths pretty much everywhere. So as you can see, my entire skill tree is strengths, except for I still need like 6 dexterity nodes to get my 50 dexterity. So priority 5 is spell damage. So it's nice if you have the budget to pick it up, but as you can see, we already have our Rathpit. So our Rathpit already gives us 1,000%, assuming we have 10,000 life. So we already have 1,000% spell damage. So yes, it's nice if you can get 100% increased spell damage in your wand, but if you can get a great wand which doesn't have spell damage or which only has like 50% but has good stats instead of it, you know what? Don't sweat the spell damage. This 108% increased spell damage doesn't even give me 10% more damage, because we already have more than 1,000% spell damage from our Rathpit. So investing heavily into spell damage, for example, on your wand or, on your jewels, or for example, on your amulet, this has a 28% increased spell damage. These stats really do nothing. Don't sweat like spell damage. Don't get it on your rings. Really don't overcommit on jewels. They don't need to have spell damage. It's really like the least important stat which boosts your damage. There's also another stat on your wand which is spell damage with spells which cost life. So even if you had like 100% spell damage and 100% spell damage with spells it costs life, it would just be a 20% increase. And a 27 increased critical strike damage bonus is probably even more than that. So I would not overcommit on spell damage. Pick it up if you get a good deal, if you can get it, but don't sweat it. The other stats are way, way more important than spell damage, especially the skill gems on your wand, the skill levels. So if you can make the decision, hey, do I get like this awesome wand with 100 spell damage and 100, spell damage with spells which cause life, but +5 skills, but it doesn't have the +2 socketed in, or you get one without the spell damage and it has +2 socketed in already, get the second one. Don't sweat the spell damage. The skill levels are so much more important. This is just, I cannot stress this enough. Spell damage is good if you can pick it up for cheap, if you can pick it up on the side, but don't focus on it. So last but not least, our priority 6 is cast speed. So even though cast speed technically is the best way to bump up your DPS, DPS is not everything. So in my mind, hit damage is much more important than DPS. So you want to have your cast speed as a reasonable amount, but you don't want to overcommit to it, right? You could smash all your jewels with cast speed. You could pick up cast speed on the skill tree. You could like commit into cast speed on your gloves like crazy, but I would not recommend to do that. So I would pick up cast speed where it makes sense. So on your wand, it's necessarily a free stat, so it makes sense to get it because you cannot really get anything else useful in the suffix. On your amulet, you can get it. It's not even 100% required, but it's probably most easy because all these amulets are crafted and they're gonna have cast speed anyway. On your ring, don't overcommit on cast speed. I would just have one cast speed roll. I know there's like people who like play the cast speed rings, but I would much rather recommend to go for rarity. So cast speed is a good pickup on the ring. On the gloves, I don't even socket in cast speed because you wanna have increased effect of socketed items on your gloves. And to be honest, you could socket cast speed in here as well. But since we already have the 80% increased effect of Arcane Surge, which we socket in here by using the Kurgal's Gaze here, we already have like an 80% increased effect of Arcane Surge. And then if you look at our passive tree, we have more increased effect of Arcane Surge, right? So we have another, this is 10, so we have another 20, then we have another 40. So totally we have 140% increased effect of Arcane Search, and if you read what Arcane Search does, it gives you a 15% increased attack speed. So we roughly get like 40% increased attack speed from our Arcane Search on top of that, and that already gives us a pretty decent cast speed. I don't think we need to overcommit into cast speed. We already have enough for this build. Obviously, you can bump your DPS further by getting more cast speed, but that is actually a pretty obvious. But I would not focus on it. This is pretty much the very last I get. So if you miss cast speed on your wand, or if you miss it on your amulet, that's not a huge deal as long as you don't miss it on all of your items. You can also compensate by socketing it in your gloves if you miss it in your wand, or for example, if you miss it in your wand and your amulet, you can still socket one extra cast speed in your gloves and you're gonna be just fine. So don't overcommit on cast speed. Alright, if you made it here, this is the conclusion. So first conclusion is, your spell is only going to deal physical damage. Everything which is lightning damage, elemental damage, whatever, is going to be worthless. Second conclusion, spell damage is not very useful if you have Rathpit, because Rathpit already saturates your spell damage. Third conclusion, prioritize skill levels over everything. Next conclusion, prioritize the life cost of your skills next. Then you go for the critical damage bonus. Then you go for the maximum life. Then you go for spell damage. And last but not least, you want to have a decent amount of attack speed. So that's pretty much the rule of the thumb if you want to play a life scaling build. This is how it works. So let me know in the comments down below if you have questions. Let me know if you like the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And thank you so much for watching. And I see you guys next time.